Oh, yeah, baby. It is the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU Works. Danny Pommells, our beat writer extraordinaire, Noah Levick, as long as the queen of Sixers fandom and of all things Sixers. It's Amy Fadool in the flesh, Big Game Amy, as well as our producer, Ben Berry. We're brought to you by Wilmington University. We are coming here on the ailing Sixers limping through a 3-game homestand, one up and 2 down for them, in the shadow of the play-in game. And, well, guys, you know, this is the part of the season where you kind of grit your teeth and hope for the best. As we saw Joel Embiid and Arthur Embiid at the arena yesterday in a loss to the Milwaukee Bucks. We're here on the eve of the Boston Celtics game as the Sixers, man, in the words of Kenny Loggins, they're on the highway to the danger zone at this point, because that playing game you do not want to be in. Hopefully, optimistically, Joel Embiid will be back soon. But I'm speaking to 2 people who were just at the Sixers practice facility. Can we get an idea of what the vibes are after this tough loss to the Bucks and Doc Rivers and Pat Bev having their way here at the Sixers facility?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard Nick Nurse more frustrated, but I definitely don't think he's thrilled right now. There are, understandable growing pains with the new pieces that are integrated and trying to figure things out in that regard. And then, of course, the old ramp up is still ramping. So we've got DeAnthony Melton, who has looked pretty good in his first couple of games back, but is only playing 17, 18 minutes. Nico Batum, ditto. So I think Nick Nurse just wants the standard to increase in terms of the cohesiveness in his team and guys being on the same page with the play calls and some of the basics as far as, the style of play and the ball movement and the transition defense and some of the fundamentals that tend to be a little bit better when you've had a group together for a long stretch of time. And that's just not the case for the Sixers. So I don't think there's any panic by any means. I think everyone knew this stretch of game post All-Star would be tough. But I think Nick Nurse has sounded a little more pleased in past days with his team than he did today. And, it doesn't get any easier. Boston Celtics are up next. But the Sixers' remaining opponents in their last 25 have an exactly 500 record. So therefore, I think you would figure things should be somewhat manageable. But the standings are tightening up, and Indy is tight on the Sixers' heels as things sit right now.
Yeah, the overarching theme, Neil, it was like they talked about a lot of cohesion and gelling. Noah really hit the nail on the head. It was just, he was obviously displeased with a lot of the effort. He talked about wanting to push the pace and how, they need to be more together in communication. It's frustrating to hear that, when you have 25 games to go, but it's understandable given the fact they have 3 new players, obviously in the last couple of weeks, including a guy, obviously, that's starting now and Buddy Hield. But yeah, it was definitely, you could tell there was some boiling over some frustrations, and now they're staring at the best team in the East. In their house. It's just there's a lot going on with only 25 games to go, and I thought you saw that. But they all seemed positive, as far as this is why they like practicing. Nick Nurse practices a lot more than any coach certainly has here, and probably more than most of the coaches out there across the league. So it's a chance for them to try to work on that. He talked about just that. Yeah, it's one thing when Tyrese Maxey's bringing the ball up, when he's not doing it, like that's when we need to figure out what we're doing. And I imagine as a coach, you're 60 games in on the season, you don't want to still be talking about communication, but that's just it's on the coaches as well as the other players. I mean, they have to work on that aspect of it. So there's a lot of that about trying to come together, this last 24 games to go.
Yeah, coming together is merely the name of the game right now. The 76ers lost 11 of their last 15. They are 7-16 without Joel Embiid, but as mentioned, there are some pieces returning. DeAnthony Melton, Nick Batum kind of being reincorporated into things. DeAnthony Melton returning, though, but there are 3 more guards on the team with Buddy Hield, Cam Payne, Kyle Lowry. He's trying to work his way back. Listen, we'll take 4 3-pointers from anybody who can make them at this point in time. But what is the reacclimation with him been like over these last couple of games, and how is the ramping up process going with him? No.
Yeah, a little funny behind the scenes story. DeAnthony Melton dipped out of there before the media contingent could get to him and got some slack for that from Tyrese Maxey. To his credit, he was willing to do an interview via phone. So literally had a Sixers PR
Wait,
guy.
that was after the Cavs game?
His first game back, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, kind of took one on the chin, and Tyrese Maxey was saying like, dude, you haven't been available in 7 months. You think like the media's not going to want to talk to you? So that I think took a little getting up to speed, but then
that's funny because then they were at the podium together after the Bucks game,
right? And it was a deserved podium game. He was good. He was one of their better players, albeit in a losing effort, but I think you saw the high volume 3-point shooting the Sixers very much need. Had 16 points in 18 minutes, and some of those Mr. Do Something qualities as well. He had 3 points, 3 assists, 3 boards, 2 steals, good defensive activity, looked pretty bouncy and athletic, and I think just physically it's been pretty positive for him. You haven't seen him really holding back in terms of contact. And he admitted like the conditioning aspect still isn't where he wants it to be, but he feels like it's moving in the right direction. And I think he was one of the better players for their team. Guys like Tobias Harris and Buddy Hield, as we'll touch on, did not perform up to the level the Sixers need him to, but the Sixers are getting that version of DeAnthony Melton on a relatively consistent basis. I think that'll be a big plus for them in this home stretch. So he still has some ways to go, but I think it's been pretty encouraging from him. I don't think this looks like a situation, barring something unforeseen, where it'll go like the last time, and he wasn't quite himself. I think he does look like pretty good thus far physically, and the Sixers will hope it keeps moving in a good direction for Melton.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to change subjects, but if you want to have more on Melton, go ahead. Well, so things are ramping up and trending in the right direction for Melton. And like you said, hopefully he doesn't take a step back onto the injured list like we saw previously. Are we getting good news regarding Joel Embiid? Because the expectation is that maybe by the end of the regular season, we might see him again. Is that something we can go with, or you feel like that's a bit tentative still?
Seems to still be the case, but I think understandably no one wants to be super definitive in that regard. But my sense is there remains internal optimism, and Nick Nurse does think he's going to see Joel Embiid back in the mix before the regular season is over. So I don't think there are any major updates in that regard, but I have seen or heard nothing to suggest that anything has been negative on that front from where the Sixers sit. But patience is definitely required here. And for the time being, we get Joel Embiid, on the sideline in the bright yellow-green hoodie with his young kid, and that's the most we can say as far as his closeness to the game these days. He's got to watch Paul Reed try to hold down the fort, and we even got
Lord have mercy.
Tomb small ball 5 minutes yesterday. So Joel Embiid is not in the picture for the time being, but it does seem like the Sixers still feel like things are going the way they want as far as his rehab process.
Yeah. Only they could play the Cavs every weekend.
I was going to say, well, I think that there's going to be a decision that needs to be made. Obviously, they're trying to stay out of that play-in tournament. Nurse stressed that today, saying, listen, we're just trying to get the wins where we can. And no one wants to be in the play-in. That's obviously not the goal. And when you look where the Sixers were, and then Embiid went down, they probably never thought they would be in this position. But that will be a question. I mean, if he's supposed to, feeling like he's ramping up, could be coming back the last week or two of the season, but you're in the 8th or 9th spot. Like, what do you do? Like, what do you do? Historically, the Sixers, I think, would probably shy away from putting him in that position, but I don't know. I think that hopefully that question doesn't have to be answered. They're firmly in the playoffs, and Embiid, the optimism is rewarded, because I agree with Noah. I think that everybody is very hopeful, and they do think it is a possibility for him to come back before the end of the regular season. He gets time to ramp up and hit the ground running when the postseason begins. But if they're in that play-in tournament, I think it's a a different thought process personally. I don't know what they would do, but I think that they would think long and hard before bringing him back coming off that injury if they were, a chance to only play one game in the postseason type of thing. So right now it's just about trying to stay out of the play-in tournament. And they're just trying, it'd be great if they could play the Cavs. I thought they would have a better game against the Knicks. That was disappointing. They talked about the slow starts and we've seen that, but that was
embarrassing in front of all those Knicks fans that made the trip down.
And they're
as well,
yelling,
man.
"Let's go Knicks!" I'm thinking, where are we right now? Walking the concourse that night, that was very heavy New York. But it was disappointing. You have two really slow starts, and that's going to doom you. I mean, you can't. This isn't not a team right now that has enough firepower to overcome a 20-point first half deficit. They were down 23 to the Knicks, so I'm sure that was another point of emphasis. They had a good, seemed like a long practice today. But I don't know. I mean, there's just. You mentioned all the depth at the guard position. That there is a lot. You got to get those guys up to speed though in conditioning, so there's not a drop off as much when whomever else comes in. If it's not Tyrese Maxey, I think there's just a lot of communication and different things going on that it feels more like early mid-season than it is 25 games to go right now. Just the vibe as far as getting the team on the same page.
Let's do a little janky math. And I say janky because
janky math. That's a segment.
At this point, we don't know when Joel Embiid will be back. The speculation is he could be back before the end of the regular season. We have 4 weeks, a full month of March to go, and then they still have 7 games in the month of April. Mm-hmm. So let's just say that, all the math works out just for the sake of this argument, and Joel Embiid doesn't play in March and then comes back Tuesday, April 2nd against OKC at home. If you're in the play-in and you get Embiid for those last 7 games and he has that ramp up into the postseason, there's a lot more, optimism and thought that there could be some damage the Sixers could do if they can stay hovering around that 7 seed, 6, 7 seed, and then maybe get themselves back into the 5th seed or something like that. And then they are playing the Knicks, and with Embiid, I feel a lot more comfortable with that type of situation. But I mean, this is all speculation at this point. I just can't see them, connecting the dots between something Pat Bev said and the way the Sixers are currently. I just can't see them throwing away a year of Joel Embiid's prime. If there's any idea that he can get himself, those 7 games in April span 2 weeks. So we're talking about 6 weeks all told from the beginning of March until the end of the regular season. So I got to think there's a version of Joel Embiid that will be healthy enough to play, considering Daryl Morey said things are trending in the right direction, and considering that, listen, you trade for Buddy Hield, you're bringing Kyle Lowry. You're not just trying to throw a haphazard lineup out there with a chance to play in the postseason. You're going to try to make some noise and get Joel back and pair him with these shooters and these other veterans and kind of push them, over the top a little bit. I mean, that's the scenario I think plays into the Sixers' favor, but it's all speculation at this point.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
We speculation. I feel like it's Joel Embiid. That's instead of the process, it should be like baby. That's his middle name. Joel, baby. We'll see.
We shall see. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, look, I think Amy's right that the guard depth has been enhanced, albeit, work still to do there. But the backup frontcourt situation, they attempted to get help there at the deadline, but pretty glaring right now that there's a lack of trust in Mo Bamba, and that is entirely warranted. He has pretty brilliant flashes as a rim protector, does block a lot of shots, but if he's not knocking down a pick and pop 3 and he's not delivering consistently good effort, he's a pretty negative player, and he's not a player that you can depend on. And I think it was rather telling that from the jump, Nick Nurse decided, with Paul Reed in foul trouble, hey, let's throw out Batum as a backup 5. And look, it's a role he's played before. I think it's interesting to try to experiment to see if that can be viable moving forward here. But Tyrese Maxey and DeAnthony Melton kind of gave each other a look when asked how much they'd worked on this before. And essentially, it doesn't sound like the Sixers had been going into this game with the idea that Batum would be their backup center. But it does feel right now like Nick Nurse's gut feel is, I don't believe in Mo Bamba very much, and I think that is entirely justifiable. So we shall see what happens.
No, you think we would have seen KJ Martin there if he was available?
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
okay.
KJ Martin was out with a right ankle injury. We'll see whether the Sixers will have him back in Boston. Yeah, I do think things look a lot better if you get KJ Martin there. He's a playable option at the 4 or the 5 on most nights. And Mo Bamba, not a lot of trust there right now. And I guess Martin's absence brought that fact to the forefront a little bit more. Ricky Council IV, does continue to get some spot minutes, and I think that's fair enough. But Mo Bamba, for this season overall, has not given the Sixers quite what they need, what they hoped they would get. And perhaps opportunities will still be there as long as Joel Embiid is sidelined, but he has not helped his case, I think, in this stretch since Embiid's injury in the Golden State game.
Man, talking about the backup front court minutes, the starting front court minutes aren't looking so good at the moment. And then before I get into Tobias Harris, it's just you put Paul Reed in a situation where you're asking him to do a little bit more than he's good at. So if he's in his strong suit and playing, next to Joel Embiid or, all those hustle minutes and stuff like that, he's not dependent on so much defensively to kind of slow guys down and things like that. He can kind of play within himself and wow QB Brown with his behind the back passes and stuff like that. Then it kind of plays into his strengths where opposed, you're asking him to play all these extra minutes and the fouls start to accumulate and, he's shooting more jumpers maybe than he should be and things like that. So it's just frustrating to have a guy like that who's such a great catalyst kind of have to be in a situation where he's got to pick up the slack for what the team's lacking. And some of that slack is there because Tobias Harris just has not been as much of a compliment. And I see you kind of your eyes getting big there, Amy. This guy's taking a ton of criticism because of his contract. But if you take the money out of it, if he was making $2 million and you're starting 4, you would still want more from him because Joel Embiid's not there, and you got to pick up the slack and give to Tyrese Maxey some help and not make him feel like all of the onus is on him to be aggressive and produce. So, are you guys taking it more as Tobias is just in a small slump? Tyrese Maxey was taking some of the responsibility on himself about getting Harris more involved, which I thought was a noble way to go about it. What are you guys seeing, and are you disappointed or optimistic here with Toby?
Yeah, we've seen Tobias go in these lulls before. He'll have 3 or 4 shots and a half, and only 5 or 6 shots an entire game, and that's confounding because it seemed like he had taken kind of steps forward this year. As far as being a more consistent player and having a few lulls in there. But now I don't know, maybe the hip injury is bothering him more, but in a game where you don't have your MVP and your 35-point scorer, like we've seen over the last couple of weeks, he should be averaging 15, 16, 17 shots a game. And you're looking at him, 9, 10, 11, some quarters he only gets 1 or 2 off. It's puzzling. And I know he's always had to kind of indoctrinate himself in whatever iteration of the offense, whoever was coaching and whoever was coming in with the players. And that, I thought he's done a nice job with that. I've always given him credit for changing his game. But this year, with the way that they played, it seemed to lend itself more to his forte of moving around, not just standing in a corner waiting for the ball to come over to him and then trying to hit down a shot. So
right. And then with Embiid out, it's like, bro, we just need to shoot the ball.
Let's
shoot
go.
The ball.
Let's just go. So I don't know. I don't know if these last 2 games have been a carryover, but he missed several games before the All-Star break, had the whole All-Star break. And then I would have thought it would have been more of a hit the ground running. And then you saw in that Knicks game, not the case. A Cavaliers game, just okay. The rest of the team I thought played really well. So it didn't really, his kind of inconsistent effort didn't show as much, but if you really watched him, he just wasn't as active. And then obviously you saw it on display in the Bucks game. So I'm not entirely sure. It was disappointing to see that far of a step back because he had been kind of trending in the right direction and I thought good chunks of the season. But just to be kind of too standoffish in a game where your team is down, you've been down the entire game. Obviously you don't have your number 1 player. You need help in any way, shape. And I don't know. I mean, maybe the coaches feel like they have to call more plays for him, but Tobias Harris has been around the league a long time. I feel like he's done a good job in the past of like finding his way in whatever system. But the last 3 games were very, I do not have good feelings right now. And maybe he'll have a great game against the Celtics and I'll say I was wrong, but I don't know. Like the last 3 games didn't look good. They didn't look like the Tobias that I would expect at this point in the season.
Nick Nurse did laud him after the Cavs game. So there's something there that the coach appreciated. And he thought Tobias played well there in that win, although the Cavs didn't have Donovan Mitchell. So that was definitely factored in how things played out. But I'm sure you have some thoughts on this note.
Yeah, he was decent, I thought, in the Cleveland game. And look, yeah, he's pretty much who he's been this season without, during the stretch without Embiid. He's just been less efficient. And he's a player who needs to be efficient in order to be valuable. So he has still taken 13 shots a game. There are certainly instances in which it's too low, and he needs to get into a little more of that Carmelo Anthony-ish mode where he's just going to the post and demanding the ball and playing through contact better. But boy, yeah, he was super shaky in the Knicks game. And still a little bit too tentative and just not making close range looks last time out against Milwaukee. And I think defensively, he's not been quite good enough either. I don't think he's been like the problem by any means, but we've seen flashes where he can like be very positive defensively and like use his size as an asset against opposing guards and kind of swallow them up. And he's just been fine or mediocre, I think, for the most part during this period where the Sixers need a little bit better. But I think usually you zoom out and the numbers are going to be very similar for Tobias Harris. But when Joel Embiid is not here, you need a little more volume. And just on an intangible sense, you need a little more feeling that he's up for the moment and he's being aggressive and he wants the ball. And it hasn't been like that as of late. I think certainly like since Embiid's absence, he's been a little worse due to the hip, but now he's healthy. He's not making any excuses for himself. And the Sixers, believe it'll get better here soon, but it's on Tobias Harris to take charge a little bit more, I think, and, seize some transition opportunities and fire up those catch and shoot threes and actually make some of them. I mean, we've had a couple of ghastly air balls for him in these last couple of games, which I think is indicative of something just doesn't feel right beyond the, obvious dip in efficiency and, lack of giving the Sixers what they need statistically. The assertiveness and just the sense that you're watching like a pretty good player hasn't been there as of late. He's been a mediocre player lately for the Sixers, and that's not going to be good enough.
And that's the thing with having Embiid out is you're hoping for your veterans, particularly the highly paid ones, to be leaders either vocally or by their actions. And Tobias, like everything is set up, injury aside, for him to help fill that void because he's a good 3-point shooter. He's a great free throw shooter. So get to the line and shoot some of these open shots or make some of these open shots. So there's room and, a little bit of latitude for him to like step in and fill some of that void. And our producer, Ben Barry, has never been a big fan of Tobias Harris, but he's in the chat letting everybody know that he thinks Tobias is not worth any of our thought, time, or consideration because he is what he has been. And listen, I mean, you can say whatever you want about what you expect from him, but this dude is a professional. Like Amy said, he's been around the block. And Noah, you mentioned he's not making any excuses for himself. So all of this criticism is going to be warranted and, on par with what someone of his ilk should get in a situation like this. And if there's no glaring injury, you got to step up, man. You got to step up, and no better game than to step up against the Boston Celtics because there's going to be a big need for them to win, considering the landscape in the Eastern Conference. this is a moment for them to kind of turn the tide going into a Charlotte game where they can also get another victory and kind of string some wins together. And not that they have to play perfect basketball, but you got to play, really at your level and a bit above in order to fill up, take up some of this void that the Sixers are lacking at this point. So this Boston game is going to be a good barometer. We'll see what kind of Tyrese Maxey we get and how things play out. We'll talk more about that. We're going to take a quick break here on the Sixers Talk podcast and pay some bills because we are proudly brought to you by Wilmington University for your higher education home. Find your higher education home at Wilmington University, where your academic success is celebrated by a caring community. Explore your opportunities at wilmu.edu. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on Open Table. Guys, I want to talk more about the Celtics game in a bit, but I'm sure Doc Rivers was happy to come away with that win, not only because he has been struggling as the Bucks head coach, but because he was back walking the sidelines here in Philly where he was fired. And Pat Bev with his mouth is always running and it never stops. And he tends to shade the truth a little bit in situations to make his argument stand up a little bit more. You feel me, Amy, on that?
That's politely putting it.
Right. So, he comes out with this idea, and John Clark followed up with him about it in the locker room with he and Keith Pompey, that the Sixers front office isn't as inclined to win at this point in time, partly because they traded him, I think was his thought, and that the fact that, even though that they're getting a second round pick and another player for him, the fact that a guy like Pat, who brought so much energy and accountability to the team, and listen, this dude was in Philly for all of 3 months, if it was that. 4 months? Are we in 5 months? But
there is no one that has a better opinion of Pat Bev than Pat Bev.
Yes.
Pat Bev on media day with a straight face said that he was not a game changer, a franchise changer. Franchise.
Didn't even blink.
Changes franchises. Franchises are holistically altered by the presence of Pat Bev. He went on his own podcast and was trying to revisit the Clippers series. It was oh yeah, JJ Redick should have come off the bench. He has these versions of history that are not even accurate. That's, you just look at JJ numbers. For anybody wondering how they blew that series, it's Doc Rivers and whatever else. It has nothing to do with JJ Redick not playing in that or not coming off the bench. You should check out JJ's numbers from that series. But anyway, Pat Bev, it was a nice player and had a good fit here. And he's a blue collar guy and he works hard. He worked his way up and people appreciated him for that. He is who he is, though. He's not giving you 25 points a game. He's a good defensive player that can sometimes knock down a bucket. He is who I don't know why he feels this need to puff it up to the fact that he's this superstar player that could have his contention that the Sixers aren't interested in winning because they traded Patrick Beverly is hilarious. Patrick Beverly. So if they kept Pat Bev in his mind, championship, just broad, just absolutely book the parade because Pat Bev. I'm not saying he doesn't make a difference, but he doesn't alter franchises. It's my favorite thing. He's a franchise changer.
I think the most true thing that I heard him say on his podcast about the deadline is Nurse got his guy, Doc got his guy, and here we go. So I don't think there's much need to read more into it than that as far as how the Sixers are approaching it. I mean, look, we certainly we'll take a look back in a year or two at how the cap space plan played out and what they do with their many options, at their disposal this summer. But for the time being, I think it's reasonable for Morey to say he feels they got a difference-making player at the deadline in Buddy Hield who's going to fit well next to the stars, and that they got a guy who can supplement their guard depth and enhance the team in a variety of ways with Kyle Lowry. And also Cameron Payne, has provided a nice little spark here in a game or two, was pretty good in that win over Cleveland. So, we'll judge the Sixers deadline down the line, but doesn't strike me as likely that there will be, deep regret at having let Patrick Beverly go elsewhere. But hey, if the Sixers and the Bucks match up, we will revisit all of this in a couple of months' time.
No, any observations, just not necessarily at the microphone, although you can include those as well, but just seeing Doc Rivers moving around the arena on the sidelines, his interaction with the players before and after the game, or any of the Sixers people. I mean, he was here, about 3 years. Look at Baker. Hello, buddy.
Just wanted to say hi. Sorry.
That's what's perfectly fine. We the cute level is right. I'm waiting too. I am waiting too. But
all right, go ahead.
Any
Sorry,
observations, Noah? Anything you saw from Doc Rivers as he was moving around the arena that people might not have been aware of?
Yeah, well, obviously he had a fun day back in the old stomping grounds. It was funny, Tyrese Maxey and DeAnthony Melton were going to the podium together, and they just so happened to intersect with Doc Rivers, so they chopped it up a little bit, and everyone seemed to be on good terms. I think Tyrese Maxey did his best to take the high road, whenever he was asked about Rivers, and put a positive spin on the fact he wasn't playing much his rookie year, and then he kind of had to show he was worthy of minutes to Doc Rivers. Yeah, I think Rivers was feeling really good about his coaching instincts. I was pretty impressed with his challenge. It was like a snap challenge. Like, no, DeAnthony, you were not fouled. Like, we're going to take another look at that, and he got it right. I think his team, of course, made everything look a lot better. They were white hot from 3-point range. I think they were 13 for 22 in the first half, and Milwaukee played a really good game. I think Rivers, as he always does, tried to put a spin that was favorable to himself when he was asked to reflect on his time in Philly. I wasn't surprised or, offended by any of that. I think we know who Doc Rivers is, and he's always going to say that, in his opinion, he did a pretty darn good job. But his team made it a good day for him, and I think. It'll be a lot more tense and a lot more charged if these teams meet in the playoffs. But I think everyone was kind of a little relieved to get that first one out of the way. And I think Rivers left there with a smile on his face and feeling like he's doing fantastic work with his new squad. And also glad to catch up with a couple of the guys who are still on the Sixers that he got close with during his time here, such as Maxey, Melton. Obviously, he's close with Tobias Harris and Joel and some of those other folks too.
The boos certainly rained down on him, though, as you might expect, as the Sixers fans let him know how they felt about his presence. But listen, I don't really want to see the Bucks in the postseason. I would anticipate Chris Middleton is going to come back at some point here over the next few weeks. The Sixers don't have that kind of firepower to be able to keep up with Middleton, Lillard, Lopez, Giannis.
If Joel's there, they might.
Maybe you hope so. Joel, what version are we getting of him is also something to think about. Although I got to believe that Joel's not going to be on the floor unless he's as close to 95% as possible. But I don't anticipate that being a matchup I would like to see at this point. But I would like to see them in like one of those 4 or 5 matchups and maybe face the Bucks or the Celtics in the second round and then whoever in the finals. But listen, Doc Rivers doesn't scare me. I think is probably the thing that I would think about the Bucks in the first place. Like I wouldn't in the postseason think he's going to out scheme Nick Nurse. They could out talent them though, and that's probably the thing that I'm worried about more than anything else.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's a decent matchup with a healthy Joel Embiid. I think it matches up certainly better than it does with the Celtics. For whatever reason, it's just been that way. But yeah, I think the in-game adjustments, I would trust Nick Nurse in that front rather than the Bucks have struggled since Doc's been there. They've been struggling. They obviously have a ton of talent, ton of firepower, but they don't have a winning record under him right now. So what are they, 500 with him or 1 under 500?
5-7. Yeah, I mean they beat Minnesota before this, which is a really good win.
That's a good win.
But right before the All-Star break, they lost to a severely decimated Grizzlies team, and definitely
blown several leads.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to see more, right, to feel like that's a stable team that's improved its defense. despite the talent level. I think that's a team, if you face in the playoffs, in all likelihood, you see ways that you can beat them and things you can exploit. I think it's looking awfully likely that the Boston Celtics will again be the number one seed. So if the Sixers were in a 4-5 situation and got through that would see in Boston yet again in round 2 of this postseason.
Really quick, we thought 2-2 was the way that this 4-game post All-Star game run would go for the 76ers. They're currently 1-2 going into Boston and not looking like a team that is quite as cohesive as you would need to be to beat Boston. So this Celtics game, are we anticipating something similar to what we saw with Milwaukee, where the Sixers just couldn't quite keep up? Paul Reed maybe a little bit out of his gourd there, playing in the middle. Are those the type of things you think might mirror themselves in this game tomorrow night in Beantown?
I do think the Sixers will lose. I don't think they'll fall behind by 25, 26 points again. I think they'll be a little sharper and a little more focused out of the gates. I think someone like Tobias Harris or Kelly Oubre Jr. is probably due for a better shooting night. But Boston's a great team. They're really, really hard to beat at home. And the Sixers will be underdogs for good reasons. So I think, the effort will be better. It'll be a more pleasant performance to watch. But I think the prediction would still be that the Boston Celtics win this game tomorrow night. And then, as you said, some easier games on the horizon after that. And the Sixers will need to take advantage of those for sure.
Yeah, if you're going to hang with Boston, you got to score a lot of points. I mean, you look at I remember it was recently, right? The Wizards went up there and almost took, and I was thinking, but the Wizards scored like 135 points. Sixers can't even sniff 120 points right now. So I don't know. It's going to be an uphill battle.
3 of the next 4 on the road. Charlotte, they will be back on Friday. So if you wanted to come out and check the fellas out and see them in a better winning situation where they will be probably favored, that is the game to pull up to. But you can also take the train up to Brooklyn if you want to, as they're taking them on Tuesday, March 5th. But this has been the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU works for Amy Fadool, Baker Kane, Noah Levick, and Ben Berry. I'm Danny Pommells. Thanks for watching, everyone. Check out Noah Levick's work on NBC Sports Philadelphia.com. We'll see you next time.